Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us to learn about date marking, variances, and HACCP plan requirements for a retail food establishment. This is part 4 of a 4-part series to help meat establishment operators understand retail food establishment requirements. At the end of this presentation, I will introduce the other presentation topics in this series. My name is James Kaplanik. I am the section manager for the Retail Food and Recreational Program section for the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. Today, I am also joined by Carrie Pahola and Katie Matulis, who are retail technical specialists for the retail program. During this presentation, we will cover the following objectives: definitions, date marking, and special processes related to variance requirements and HACCP plan requirements. I will now turn this over to Carrie.
Thanks, Jim. So as Jim stated, we are going to first cover definitions. So the first definition is HACCP plan. So what is a HACCP plan? A HACCP plan means a written document that delineates the formal procedures for following the hazard analysis and critical control point principles developed by the National Advisory Committee on Biological Criteria for Foods. The next definition is reduced oxygen packaging. So what do we mean when we say reduced oxygen packaging? Well, this is defined by the food code, and it means the reduction of the amount of oxygen in a package by removing the oxygen, displacing oxygen, and replacing it with another gas or combination of gases, or otherwise controlling the oxygen content to a level below that normally found in the atmosphere, which is approximately 21% at sea level. Continuing the definition of reduced oxygen packaging, it is a process as specified in subparagraph 1A of this definition, which we discussed in the prior slide, that involves a food for which the hazards Clostridium botulinum or Listeria monocytogenes require control in the final packaged form. Reduced oxygen packaging includes the following. First, vacuum packaging. Vacuum packaging happens when the air is removed from the package of food and the package is hermetically sealed so that a vacuum remains inside the package. Next is modified atmosphere packaging. This is when the atmosphere of a package of food is modified so that its composition is different from air, but the atmosphere may change over time due to the permeability of the packaging material or the respiration of the food. Modified atmospheric packaging includes reduction in proportion of oxygen, total replacement of oxygen, or an increase in the proportion of other gases such as carbon dioxide or nitrogen. Next on the list is controlled atmospheric packaging. You may hear this referred to as CAP. This is when the atmosphere of a package of foods is modified so that until the package is open, its composition is different from air, and continuous control of that atmosphere is maintained, such as by using oxygen scavengers or a combination of total replacement of oxygen, non-respiring food, and impermeable packaging material. Chill packaging is another form of reduced oxygen packaging, and this is when a cooked food is hot filled into impermeable bags which have the air expelled and then are sealed or crimped closed. The bag is rapidly chilled and refrigerated at temperatures that inhibit the growth of psychotropic pathogens. And finally, sous vide package. This is when food is packaged raw or partially cooked in a vacuum packaged environment in an impermeable bag. It is cooked in that bag, rapidly chilled, refrigerated at temperatures that inhibit the growth of your psychotropic pathogens. Now we will define a variance. So, when we talk about a variance means a written document issued by the department that authorizes a modification or waiver of one or more requirements of this code if, in the opinion of the department, a health hazard or nuisance will not result from the modification or waiver. This is typically required when conducting a special process per the food code, but we will talk about that more a little later in the slides. You might hear the term date marking when your retail inspector comes into your establishment. So let's touch on what date marking is. So the food code requires that refrigerated, ready to eat, time temperature control for safety food, prepared and held in a food establishment for more than 24 hours shall be clearly marked to indicate the date or day by which the food shall be consumed on the premise, sold, or discarded for a maximum of 7 days. I do want to add that a time temperature control for safety food means a food that requires time and temperature control for safety. You might hear us also refer to that as TCS, to limit pathogenic microorganism growth or toxin formation. As I said, you're probably going to hear this term throughout the presentation. Finally, other date marking considerations will be discussed in the special process section. So what is a special process? When we talk about special processes under the Retail Food Establishment License requires a variance and or HACCP plan and include the following specific to meat type establishments. So a special process could involve using food additives or adding components such as vinegar. This is going to act as a method of food preservation rather than a method of flavor enhancement, or to render that food so that it is no longer a time temperature control for safety food or TCS food. An example of this would be adding a starter culture to lower pH in a sausage product. The next is going to be smoking food as a method of food preservation rather than as a method of flavor enhancement. Next on the list, you will see curing food. So adding cures such as sodium nitrite will also trigger the requirements and is identified as a special process. Another special process would be packaging your time temperature control for safety food or TCS food using a reduced oxygen packaging method, except where the growth of and toxin formation by Clostridium botulinum and the growth of Listeria monocytogenes are controlled as specified under section 3-502.12. Other special processes as identified by the food code, custom processing animals that are for personal use as food and not for sale or service in a food establishment. This does not apply to your amenable species under the food code. This is more for custom processing of your game animals such as venison, bison, elk, etc. And finally, preparing food by another method that is determined by the department to require a variance or anything that scares us, as my old predecessor used to say. I want to add that if you fall under meat or USDA inspection, a variance for custom processing under retail would not be required. So now what I do? I'm at a loss here. Well, don't worry. We are going to go through special processes specific to meat processing establishments. We're going to discuss the variance process, what needs to be in the HACCP plan at retail, and review each of the special processes and date marking options. So let's start with the variance process at retail. What is that? Well, first off, there's going to be a request for modification or waiver of the requirements of this chapter, and this needs to be submitted in writing to the regulatory authority having jurisdiction along with the required documentation. And I will go over what the required documentation is going to be. A local inspector shall review the request and forward it to the department, which is us, with recommendations for approval or disapproval. On receipt of a complete variance request as specified in this section, and that will be covered in the next slide, the department shall review the request and grant or deny the request in writing within 30 working days. If the variance is granted, the regulatory authority shall maintain a copy of the variance in the food establishment's inspection history file. You are also required to have a copy of that approval on file in your establishment as well. Any documentation justifying the proposed modification or waiver from the requirements of the food code shall include the following information: a statement of the proposed variance from the chapter requirement. You're going to want to cite relevant chapter section numbers, an analysis of the rationale for how the potential public health hazards and nuisances addressed by the relevant chapter section will be alternatively addressed by the proposed variance, and a HACCP plan if relevant to the variance request or required by the department. So as I had stated, we will be looking for a HACCP plan when it is required. So what should be in the HACCP plan? What do you want to include in that plan? So for a food establishment that is required to have a HACCP plan, the plan and specification shall have the following: a product description, which is going to include what it is, packaging, storage, how will it be sold. We're going to want a flow chart to include all the steps in the process from receiving to sale, with critical control points in the flow chart identified. Next is the hazard analysis, taking each step of the process and determining physical, chemical, and biological hazards. Looking at that hazard analysis, we are going to develop the HACCP matrix. This is going to address the critical control points in the process, as well as identify the critical limits, and as I like to say, the how, when, and who. So monitoring, verification, documentation, etc., of those critical limits within those critical control points. Any recipes, logs, standard operating procedures, sanitation standard operating procedures, validated studies. Examples would be your FSIS Appendix A and Appendix B should be included in the plan. And finally, equipment used in conjunction with the special process. For example, what kind of vacuum packaging machine is being used, or type of smoker that they're proposing that they're going to smoke the product. So I'm now going to turn it over to Katie, who's going to cover the specifics of each of the special processes and date marking that I had just mentioned in earlier slides.
Carrie. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about special processes that you will need to be aware of at your establishment and how HACCP and date marking would apply. First is smoking for preservation. This is not a common practice. Most facilities smoke for flavor, not preservation. Using a smoking method for preservation to extend a product's shelf life would require a variance and HACCP plan. The extension of shelf life would also require a product assessment. A smoked product has 7 days under refrigeration unless science is provided that supports a longer shelf life. No date marking is required if the product is a non-time temperature control for safety food or if the product is held frozen. A more common special process is curing. Curing meat and poultry products under a retail license requires a variance and HACCP plan. Meat and poultry products that are cured at retail must be date marked for 7 days under refrigeration unless science is provided to support a longer shelf life, or held frozen with no date marking requirement. I do want to add that raw meats and poultry do not have date marking requirements unless they are reduced oxygen packaged, which we will touch on in a later slide. The last special process we'll discuss is reduced oxygen packaging requirements and scenarios. Reduced oxygen packaging, also known as ROP or vacuum sealing, requires a HACCP plan and may require a variance depending on the ROP product. There is an ROP HACCP plan exemption listed in the Wisconsin Food Code. The exemption states that a HACCP plan is not required when a food establishment uses a reduced oxygen packaging method to package a TCS, or time temperature control for safety food that is always 1, labeled with the production time and date, 2, held at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or less during refrigerated storage, and most importantly, number 3 is removed from its package in the food establishment within 48 hours after packaging. ROP product that is not exempt from a HACCP plan can be date marked for up to 30 days at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or below if it is a food with a high level of competing organisms, such as a raw meat, raw poultry, or raw vegetables, meets a water activity of 0.91 or less, has a pH of 4.6 or less, or is a meat or poultry product cured at a food processing plant regulated by the USDA or DATCAP and is received in an intact package. ROP product that is cooked and or cured under a retail license must be date marked for no more than 7 days under refrigeration unless science is provided that supports a longer shelf life, or the product can be held frozen with no date marking requirement until it is placed under refrigeration. Additional HACCP requirements include labeling and standard operating procedures. ROP packages must be labeled on the principal display panel with instructions to maintain the food at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or below, and to consume or discard the food within the expiration date of its packaging. HACCP plans must be submitted to the department prior to implementation and include operational procedures that prohibit contacting ready-to-eat food with bare hands and identify designated work areas and methods that maintain separation of raw foods and ready-to-eat foods to minimize cross-contamination, delineate cleaning and sanitization procedures for food contact surfaces, and ensure that access to the processing equipment is limited to trained personnel familiar with the potential hazards of the operation. The HACCP plan should also describe a training program that ensures that the individual responsible for the reduced oxygen packaging operation understands the equipment, facilities, and concepts required for a safe operation. Now we'll discuss 3 different ROP scenarios. The first is ROP cheese. A food establishment that packages cheese using a reduced oxygen packaging method shall have a HACCP plan and limit the cheeses packaged to those that are commercially manufactured in a food processing plant with no ingredients added in the food establishment and that meet the standards of identity as specified in 21 CFR or the Code of Federal Regulations. Packages must be labeled on the principal display panel with a use-by date that does not exceed 30 days from its packaging or the original manufacturer's sell-by or use-by date, whichever occurs first. And finally, ROP cheese must be discarded if it is not sold by the expiration date. The next ROP process that requires a HACCP plan is ROP fish. A food establishment may not package fish using a reduced oxygen packaging method except for fish that is frozen before, during, and after packaging. There is no date marking requirement because the product is maintained frozen throughout the entire process. Lastly, we'll discuss cook, chill, and sous vide. A food establishment that packages TCS food using a cook, chill, or sous vide process shall provide a HACCP plan to the department prior to implementation and ensure the food is prepared and consumed on the premises or prepared and consumed off the premises, but within the same business entity with no distribution or sale of the packaged product to another business entity or the consumer. The product must be cooked to heat all parts of the food to a temperature and time as specified in the Wisconsin Food Code. The product must be protected from contamination before and after cooking and be placed in a package with an oxygen barrier and sealed before cooking or placed in a package and sealed immediately after cooking and before reaching a temperature below 135 degrees Fahrenheit. After cooking, the package must be cooled to 41 degrees Fahrenheit in the sealed package or bag as specified in the Wisconsin Food Code and must subsequently be cooled to 34 degrees Fahrenheit within 48 hours of reaching that initial 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and then held at that temperature until consumed or discarded within 30 days after the date of packaging. Another option is to hold the product at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or less the entire time for no more than 7 days. The product can also be held frozen with no shelf life restriction until it is thawed or used. Again, the product must be consumed on site. Chill and sous vide products must also be held in a refrigeration unit that is equipped with an electronic system that continuously monitors time and temperature and is visually examined for proper operation twice daily. If product is transported off-site to a satellite location of the same business entity, the vehicle must be equipped with a verifiable electronic monitoring device to ensure that the times and temperatures are monitored during transportation. Any records required to confirm that time temperature parameters, such as cooling and cold holding, are met as part of the HACCP plan must be maintained, available to regulatory authority upon request, and retained for at least 6 months. That now concludes the slides on special processes. I'll now hand it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Katie. The following slides are resources that you will be able to have access to and be available for you to use in your operation. This slide talks about the different administrative rules and fact sheets that are available for you to access. To download a copy of these rules, you can simply enter the following web address into your browser. For example, for a copy of HACCP 75, the Wisconsin Food Code, simply enter the above copy the above web address into your browser. The same would be true for a copy of HACCP 55, This is the administrative rule for meat establishments. The retail program also has created mini fact sheets that can be accessed by entering the web address in the DATCAP website. At any time, feel free to pause the webinar so that you can accurately copy the web addresses. We also have other resources that are available to you. If you have specific technical questions regarding your meat establishment or retail establishment operation, feel free to email the meat or retail technical mailboxes above. If you have a specific licensing question regarding your operation, feel free to email the licensing technical mailbox and they will assist you with any licensing questions that you have. Please don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. We are here to act as a resource for you. As I mentioned earlier, this page allows you access to the other presentations found in this series. By copying the above link and pasting into your browser, you can access the other presentations in this series, which include what to expect from a retail food establishment inspection, retail food establishment licensing requirements in a meat establishment, and basic retail food establishment equipment requirements and certified food protection manager requirements. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope we have increased your understanding of date marking, variances, and HACCP plan requirements in a retail food establishment. Have a great day.